Greetings all, this is Gerald Clark. This is November 25th, 2017. Today I want to go over something kind of exciting, it's at least exciting to me. I'm going to talk about the Mayan fifth sun and Ascension timing. So I hope you find this interesting. Many of you will recognize this image of the Aztec calendar from which the Mayans took from the Aztec, or the Aztec took from the Mayan, okay? A couple of points of interest that I want to start with, just as a starting point, just so you can get grounded in the idea of what we're talking about. First of all, the Mayans established a long count that has been agreed upon by researchers to be August 11th, 3014 BCE. Okay, so that's the start date that was a countdown to something which was what they delineated in another calendar as the fifth sun. So this Mayan sun duration, each one of their suns lasted 5,120 years, which is a multiple of 13 and 20, which they used in these interesting ratios. And we'll talk a little bit more about that just real quick. I got a lot of information today, so I'm going to go a little bit quick, but I will supply you with the source material, okay? So let's just do a little math real quick. 5120 years for a Mayan sun, subtract the start date, and that actually lands you in 2006. So many people believe the Mayan calendar ends in 2012 on the winter solstice, and there's a lot of evidence to support that. But just a rough back of the envelope calculation, just looking at it, it's at least 2006, okay? So just using the mile-long count and subtracting it from the duration of a solar term, we get 2006. Alternatively, and I really like Ian Lundgold, he identified October 28, 2011 as the beginning of the new Mayan fifth sun and its subsequent universal consciousness. And from the Mayan Zolkin calendar, many people have decoded that it ends on the winter solstice, December 21st, 2012. This is where all the 2012 prophecies came from. Okay, so here's a diagram that coincides with what Ian Lundgold believed about the 9 levels. Okay, so there are 9 rows here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And there's actually 13 columns right here, okay? It's segregated into 7 days, okay, and 6 nights. And it was interesting the way they delineated this. So this 13 relates to I guess you would call a decimation factor of 20. So every one of these rows divides itself by 20 to get down to this collapsing point on the very last point of the pyramid, where every 20 days you get a day-night cycle. Okay, so and that means that, of course, happy things are supposed to happen during the day cycles, and destructive things. So it's kind of creation and destruction, if you will. Anyway, so this, and each one of these levels was associated with a frequency, which they called the 9 Mayan underworld frequencies. And the frequency is what established what type of life manifested in these little epochs, okay? So that's kind of the idea. All right, so starting from that, let's go down a little bit. So this one calls the end date when the last Mayan sun occurs. The fifth one is October 28, 2011. So we had a 2006, we had a 2011. I think I have one of them here that shows you the 2012 count. If not, that one's the most popular, okay? But my point is, whatever the exact date is for the beginning of this universal consciousness and fifth solar cycle, it's already passed, whether it was 2006, 2011, or 2012. Here we are in 2017. So what evidence do we have there's any change at all in our inner sun? And what could it all mean relative to human consciousness and a potential new experience either here or on the earth? So here's a interesting diagram that showed the timing of the Mayan calendar. This one also ended, it looks like, the same as Ian Lundgold's on October 28, 2011. It looks like it was German. So just to give you another view of how the people see this happening, and as these last 20 days, which are periods of 20 as you go into different ones, have different terms. And the last one, it's every 20 days. So it's supposed to get real exciting right at the end. And it's supposed to end in universal consciousness. That means all of us end up getting some sort of conscious bump due to some factor, and I'm going to talk about that today. And one thing I want to say is most everything here that's highlighted in green, I wrote. The stuff that's in yellow is borrowed from an article that I'll be sharing with you today, okay? So given that both modern science and thought indicate that we live in a multiverse in which our holographic reality is based on 9 parallel dimensions and 1 dimension of time, one can think of a dimension as a frequency and a corresponding wavelength range that the sensor of an avatar will need to operate in a particular environment or planet. For instance, humans see a subset of the electromagnetic spectrum in our current incarnation, although a much larger spectrum exists, whose radiation is generated by our combustible sun. From fire comes forth light. This should ring a bell for those that have watched How is the Human Soul Related to Light, my last show, on my premium content channel. Thus, our avatar meat modems exposed through heightened energy at the galactic center is the Mayan fifth sun catalyst, and the physics of that transition will be explored shortly. So some interesting questions are posited by me about all through this document. I'm going to give you about 6 of them. Here's the first couple. So what is the correlation between universal consciousness, as posited by the Mayans, and the physics involved in a burning sphere, our sun, entering the galactic center, which they represented as a ball game with a stone hoop? And for those of you who don't know about the Mayan ball game, they basically personified the crossing into the dark rift by shooting a ball through a hoop that represented our solar system going through the center. I thought that was a very esoteric allegory, and somebody from not of this dimension had to teach them that, because they couldn't have made that up on their own. I don't think. Question number 2, could the sinusoidal planar transition at the galactic center be a region where a large amount of fuel exists, stoke the stellar fire leading to a higher radiation emitted from our sun? Okay, this is just Newtonian physics, and I'll show you some diagrams of what I'm talking about here. So the idea that every time our sun passes through the galactic center and gets exposed to extra fuel so it gets hotter is what I'm suggesting, okay? My previous analysis involving our transit through the galactic center focused on the increase in energy radiated in many frequencies and wavelengths that humans would be exposed to, but I did not consider the effect on our sun and its subsequent changes, and of course the changes they would cause to the Earth. I want to get you oriented a little bit in the galaxy. Krista and I woke up this morning and had a conversation about where we are in the whole scheme of things, so we should have recorded it. It was really great. But our solar system can be thought of as a small cluster that's being dragged along in a counterclockwise rotational orbit as part of the Milky Way galaxy. Modeling the center of our galaxy as a black hole has been the hypothesis that science has been using for some time, whose diameter is approximately 14 trillion miles. From the center of the galaxy, a radial spiraling arm extending outward from the center to the location of our solar system can be envisioned, as shown below, approximately 28,000 light years from the center, swinging along the Orion arm. So let's take a look at this picture here. Okay, here's the Milky Way galaxy. It's obviously, if you just look at the spiraling arms, they look like they're emanating out this way, so that would mean the body is rotating this way, okay, which kind of contradicts something I'm going to show you a little bit later. Anyway, this diameter is about 14 trillion miles according to an approximation, okay. You can see it's kind of planar, it's a spiral shaped, and if you come out along this arm, right about here, about just before 30 light years, about 26 to 28,000 light years, this is where our solar system sits on what's called the local arm or the Orion arm. Okay, so each of these little arms is emanating out like this. They call them an arm and they get names, okay? And there's several of them. Here's Perseus, Norma, Crux, Scrotum arm, okay? And there are diagrams of listing what all the arms are, just so you know. Anyway, so here we are out in this little dusty arm being dragged along by this this core at the center of our Milky Way galaxy, along with all of the rest of this, okay? So we're just a little speck down here in this dust cloud. And it gets quite interesting when you look at it from the relationship of the galactic plane to our plane and then the interactions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So note that the long arms or clusters of planets and other systems are shown intermingled with dust and debris and gases that are spiraling around the center and are most prominent along the galactic equator or plane and in the spiral arm, okay? This plane in rotation appears to have a wobble, just like our Earth does relative to its pole, which establishes the timing cycle can be used to reference other objects that are moving in conjunction with our galactic gyrations, okay? The most important cycle for us appears to be the time it takes for our solar system to transit through the galactic center. Now, this is a more esoteric timing cycle that's important, which is called the Great Year, which has been detailed to be theoretically 360 degrees times 72 degrees for each single degree of precessional slip, which works out to about 25,920 years, or a great year, okay? You'll see this a lot. Some people just round it up to 26,000, whatever, and that's assuming that the body or the sphere is exactly 360 degrees and so on and so forth. But this is a theoretical calculation. Assuming that our solar system would be at the center of the galactic plane on its arm, although inclined at a 60-degree angle, then the time either side of the center of the plane would be 1/2 of the Great Year, or 12,960 years. This is just half this number, okay? So this is just theoretical, and the actual time spent above and below the galactic plane is an estimate, but it should be very close, okay? All right, so here's a diagram to give you an idea. Imagine this large spiraling mass, our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, is sitting on a flat plane that is oriented like this, okay? And so this body here moving represents our solar system moving counterclockwise in this direction, somehow indicating that this would be moving that direction, even though the spiral looks like it would be going that direction. So I have to clarify that. Either way, what I want you to note is the sinusoidal up and down motions of our solar system through this dashed line that's actually representing the plane of the galaxy, okay, the galactic center plane. Okay, so you can see it kind of makes a wave-like motion up and down, up and down. And if it was originally centered right here in the middle, you can see that the up and the down are approximately equivalent in between here. And the time from here to here, what we're saying is, well, half that, for a full cycle from here to here would be 25,920 years, and half of that would be about 13,000, okay? So that's kind of giving you a model of where we're at in the big scheme of things. It's something to ponder while you're having your breakfast. So what this means is approximately every 13,000 years, our solar system will be sinusoidally crossing the galactic center plane, this plane right here, like that, okay? Where the majority of the energy and debris concentrate in the long spiral arms rotating around the center like a spider nebula. And listen, keep in mind that a black hole is so powerful that along that plane, it's even capturing light as it gets closer in, okay? So the closer in you get to the center here, you reach this theoretical event horizon, and even photons get captured by the intensity of this gravitational pull. Okay, or whatever the vortex that's created there. We can have a lot of debate about what that is. Anyway, so keep that in mind. So when you get on this plane, not only is there more debris that's being pulled along this flat nebula disk, but also lots more energy because of what's happening even with photons. So keep that in mind as well. That's what I covered in my book. Okay, let's move on. Here's another little diagram. It's kind of busy. I'll try to do it real quick for you. Okay, so here's this blue line is the galactic plane. Okay, my cat's objecting. Let me close the door here for a second. Here's the galactic plane. Here's our solar system here, caught up out in one of these radial arms of the Orion local arm. And they're showing the motion counterclockwise this way, coming around the Milky Way galaxy, okay? So as the Milky Way galaxy spins and wobbles, it drags everything with it. And because of the wobble of the Milky Way galaxy, that's what causes our solar system to wobble up and down. It's actually just responding to the motion that's being caused by the Milky Way galaxy rotating, okay? And I didn't verify some of these numbers, but I'll show them to you here in just a second. Okay, so here's our Earth. Here's our North Pole. You can see it inclined on its axis relative to the vertical. Here's the solar ecliptic here. Okay, so this inclination angle of the sun and our solar system, this angle relative to this angle, you can see, I don't know if you were to draw a line right there, that's about 60 degrees right there. Okay, and that's the approximation of how different our our ecliptic plane that we go around is relative to this plane that we're also going around. So we do a lot of spinning. All right. Here's some numbers. I'll need to verify these, but I'll offer them up to you here just as a point of order. And for all the people that have theoretical models about how the universe works, I think many of these numbers have been verified by science using lasers, using space-based telescopes and sensors and satellites to sense a lot of this data. So speed of the Earth rotation at the equator is 0.465 kilometers per second. Speed of the Earth around the sun, 30 kilometers per second. Speed of the sun around the Milky Way. So this is another speed. You start to realize now the sun is not stationary, 230 kilometers per second. And then the sun is approximately 26,000 light years from the galactic center. In the other diagram we saw, it was about 26 to 28, something like that. So it's about right. Okay? Okay, so now just keep in mind, each time our solar system crosses this galactic center plane, there will be direct and indirect energetic changes felt in our solar system. Okay, and that goes for everyone else too that's getting dragged along at that time. And an interesting thing to notice, I think I have to go back to this other diagram here, is imagine you're close here versus out far, and this thing is wobbling. Okay, the further out you are, the more displacement you'll get along the center here. Just like in real life. So, if this is about 40 light years and this is about 28 to 26, we get a lot of wobble up and down, and that's probably why. Okay, let me get a little sip of coffee. We're going to switch subjects now. So a fan of mine sent this to me, and I'm not sure I can mention her name yet. I'll get clearance to do so, and if so, I'll do a call out to her. But it was quite interesting. Just out of the blue, sent me this article, and I want to discuss this with you, delve a little bit into the solar physics, which I'll summarize so I don't lose you guys, okay? The title of the article is Geoengineering, Chemtrails, HARP, World Orders, Timelines, and Ascension. Wow, what a bunch of stuff together, but it turned out to be really great. As I mentioned, a fan gave me this, and I'll make it available to others reading full. Okay. I had trouble finding the source of it, so I hesitated in even sharing it with you until I had assimilated it. Okay. Daniel is supposedly the name of the author, and hopefully if Daniel sees this video, that he'll reach out to me. I'd like to have a discussion with him. And he claims to have worked firsthand on the Montauk project, which is a project that had to do with time travel research that the government did, okay? And a lot of people in the alternative theory space know about this, so I thought it was kind of fascinating to get this perspective from this individual. Okay, he wrote this article in response to a radio show, and I won't mention what it was until I get a little more of an established source where this came from, which discussed a negative timeline as being some kind of synthetic quantum environment, orchestrated by the gray ETs, stating that this negative timeline was all made up. And for some reason, this topic triggered him to write this article. And so it seems really far out fetched, but wait till we get into it, okay? So this is writing from Daniel in the yellow. Having worked as a technician on the Phoenix 3 project, more commonly known as the time travel aspect of the Montauk project, I have firsthand knowledge of what was going on and what they were trying to do relative to these artificial timelines that were mentioned on a radio show. And it appears they are using some of the knowledge gleaned from those experiments in geoengineering application. In the 20 years that have passed since those experiments, I have learned much and decided to take a look at it in the context of the new knowledge provided by Dewey Larson's reciprocal system of physical theory, RS for short. Phoenix 3 was a covert attempt to determine the nature of time, if it could be manipulated, and if so, the process to do it. Without going into details, the short answer is that those involved never came to an understanding of time other than it was not what conventional physics thought it was, but were able to make some use of the technology obtained in order to perform temporal experiments into the past and future. In order to assess time, a navigation computer from a faster-than-light propulsion system was utilized to open a portal from which a visual record could be made. In later experiments, a way was found to send living organisms through this portal to other chronological periods. Through this, although this was highly dangerous and seldom worked as expected. I wonder if they came back mutated. Due to the nature of the equipment being used, only persons with a highly developed psionic ability could operate it. I'm not quite sure what that means, if it has a thought interface or what. Okay, one of the issues was that time travel experiments ran into a bump, literally crossing the 2012-13 year boundary conventional calendar. At the time, it appeared to be some kind of artificial reality that was constructed by the psychic running the chair. The experts did not know what to make of it, but for the most part thought it was a realistic view of the period being viewed because it was consistent with different psychics, and everyone sent forward returned with very similar information. Looking at it now, it would seem to be more consistent with a synthetic quantum environment than a natural one, which may explain why it was always frozen past a specific point. With what we know now, there's a good deal of truth to this hypothesis. So I wanted to comment on this idea of a synthetic virtual reality or timelines and such. And Thoth in his Emerald Tablets explains the constructs of the holographic universe, which modern science is just now in limited agreement with relative to the number of dimensions and their parallel existence. The holographic universe from the creator of all is quantum, to be sure. As for synthetic attributes, those were created as a subset of the source timeline to trap non-ascending entities into a doomed dimension like our slave planet Earth. One can think of our dimension and the parallel ones as spheres within spheres whose radii change from the center. And this is directly analogous to the 9 Mayan underworld frequencies that we discussed in that chart and their corresponding frequencies, which I discuss in detail on my blog here.